Greetings and welcome back. These are our final observations for Milton's Paradise Lost. And if you're taking notes, we'll label this brief mini lecture summative observations on Milton's Theodicy. Remember that Milton has an agenda. He has multiple agendas, as we said already. His objective is to write the greatest poem ever written. Now, this is a huge debate, and of course it's hyperbolic to engage in it, right? It's exaggerative to even try to answer, is it the greatest poem ever written? If you're talking about influence, it certainly deserves to be up there. If you're talking with, poets, they will often say it's awfully hard to try to consider ever bettering what Milton pulls off in this really complicated poem. One of the best word pictures I know of for this poem comes from the great Peter Sacha, who lectures at Dartmouth, who's also a Milton scholar. And he says reading Paradise Lost is like those organs that they have in those cathedrals in Vienna and elsewhere that Bach, created his music for, where if you've never seen one of those huge organs, those pipe organs, you have the keys that your hands are working with, but then down below you've got all of these foot pedals also that are being played with simultaneously. To play one of those organs takes lots of training because it is the musical equivalent of, patting your head and rubbing your belly simultaneously. You're literally doing this with your fingers, but you're also doing all this other stuff with your feet at the same time to be able to create that sound. Milton's poetry is a lot like that. There's this stuff going on that's kind of superficial. A lot of high school readers of this poem and young college readers, they're really intimidated by that. It's like word after word after word after word that they don't even know. So it's like, whoa, it's over. It's like the first wave hits them. But once they start kind of working with the poem, reading it out loud, for example, over and over, memorizing parts of it, they start to recognize that there's this secondary kind of thing that's going on, not only with the language, but with the ideas as well. Our lecturer, for example, pointed out that in Book 9, line 999, and Book 2, line 666, those kinds of things are almost like a second part. So there's this layering, the fabric of this poem that's quite compelling. And if nothing else, even if you don't like it, you have to appreciate that Milton's able to pull it off. But Milton's project is a theodicy. It is an attempt to answer the question, why is it bad things happen in the world? Now, there are a lot of ways to ask this question. We often will create that triangle, as I think we already gave you, where on one corner of the triangle we put an all-powerful deity or deities. On another corner, we put an all-loving deity or deities. And then on that third corner, we put evil, pain, suffering, bad things. And we ask, how can you ever, to mix my metaphor, square the triangle? That is to say, how can you account for the fact that a child is dying of leukemia if there is such a thing as an all-powerful and all-loving deity? An all-powerful deity could create the solution to the problem of cancer. Why doesn't this all-powerful deity or deities do it? It must not be a very loving deity. Oh, no, God is all-loving. What do you mean God is all-loving and also all-powerful, but my kid's still dying of leukemia? One of those three things just doesn't make any sense. And that's the question of theodicy. That's another way to do it. Another way to phrase this question is the simple question of, what happened to paradise? Or, can we ever create perfection? In Voltaire's classic Candide, paradise isn't called Eden, it's called El Dorado. In mythologies of all kinds, there's this notion of a pristine moment, a perfect moment, when everything is great, where there is no pain, there is no suffering. Of course, in the Buddhist tradition, we call this nirvana, and in the Christian tradition, we call it heaven, don't we, or paradise. It's interesting to note that the word paradise doesn't get used in the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, Genesis 3, does it? That word paradise doesn't get used there either, does it? And yet this is another way of framing the question of theodicy. Can we create, and this will sound very much like Plato's Republic, can we ever create the perfect place? Can you have the perfect family? Can you have the perfect team? Can you have the perfect country? Can you have the perfect marriage and on? Can you have the perfect relationship? Can you have the perfect friendship? Can you have the perfect parenting or whatever? That kind of, every time you put the word perfect in front of it, that's the theodicy question. Why aren't all relationships perfect? Why aren't all families perfect? Why aren't all schools perfect, with the exception, of course, of said Warland High? Why aren't, and then, the question, that's the theodicy question all over again. What went wrong? Like, why isn't the world perfect? That's another way to phrase this question. Milton has an answer. His answer is, of course, rooted in a theology, no doubt, that we call today Christian theology. His answer is, though, very complicated. Let's work through his answers. On the most simple surface, his answer to the woman whose child is dying of leukemia is what? On its most simplest instantiation, what is his answer? Why is it?
Because Adam and Eve sinned.
Yeah, it's your fault. It's your fault. What do you mean it's my fault? Well, not you personally, but you're a human being. And if you want, all you got to do is go back to the very first human being. Let's call them Adam and Eve. Okay. But wait a minute, it gets a little more dicey than that, because in Milton, who's really to blame for that between Adam and Eve?
Satan.
Well, yeah, there's the next question. Satan. Satan, however, convinces who? Adam or Eve to eat from this forbidden fruit? Yeah, Eve's the one. How does he get her? That's why Book 9 is such a crucial book in Paradise Lost. Notice how he gets her. He goes, oh, you're hot enough to be a Victoria's Secret model. You're hot enough to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated swimsuit model. And she immediately goes, am I? Oh, I am. Bam, he's got her. Now he can give her any temptation, and she's gonna. Interestingly, though, the temptation isn't Sports Illustrated swimsuit model's cover. That's not the temptation. He gives her the temptation to be knowledge. That's the temptation. The temptation is to know. In the 1611 King James Version of the Bible, the Genesis 3 account, some of you will go back to begin to reread that and reread that again and again to go, wow, that is a really remarkable chapter of verses. Notice that the promise is you will be like God, knowing good and evil. Right? And yes, I want to learn things. For all of us who sit in an AP English class, we're kind of familiar with that temptation to learn things I didn't know before. Wait a minute. The answer to the woman whose child is dying of cancer is, well, you see, there were this first human beings and they had to know things. And that's what led to the fall. And that's why your kids got cancer. Because in the moment of eating of this apple, remember, this fruit of this forbidden tree, remember, not only did Adam and Eve fall, not only do all humans after Adam and Eve fall, but the world itself becomes corrupted. Eden itself becomes corrupted. There is no more paradise. There is no more El Dorado. Perfection is gone. But then we go one step backwards. Well, Eve doesn't eat of this if it isn't for this creation thing, this Satan, this satanic force. Which again, of course, in the Genesis 3 account, we don't have any clear indication that this serpent is Satan. Milton identifies it as not only Satan, but a Satan who wishes to destroy. But interestingly, destroy who? This is interesting for Milton. Why does Satan take his journey into Eden to convince Eve she needs to know stuff?
Because he knows that he's going to lose, so he's just going to try to take them.
Who is he trying to destroy?
He's trying to spite God.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. Satan is going to fight with God. I know how we can get to the perfect deity, the perfect being, the all-powerful, all-knowing God. I know how we can jack with him. The way we jack with him is his new creation. when we ruin his new creation, we ruin somehow God's plan. Okay? Now, Milton is kind of fuzzy on this. Is it God's plan that Adam and Eve will eat from this fruit? Why can't God stop Satan from entering Eden? Like, it almost seems as if it's part of the plan, which is part of the Theodicy as well. And obviously will beg that even more interesting question, well, if you're going to blame Satan, then do you have the right to blame Satan's creator, which is in this case, of course, for Milton, God. So see, you can see how this answer can become kind of a challenge theologically to the believer. Is Milton a theist, believer in God, or is he actually an atheist? Is he trying to create doubt in the minds of readers, or is he actually trying to give an actual answer to the theodictic question? Of course, Milton's Theodicy raises lots of other questions as well. We can think about how Plato's project in Republic is Milton's project. To find the perfect republic, remember, that's the project of Plato, means education, right? Remember? But remember, his education is built foundationally on a lie that we'll get told and then we'll get believed, right? But notice, Plato really wants perfection. That's what he hopes for. Now let's phrase it in a more modern, even postmodern kind of way of saying. The quest is to try to understand the tension, I'll use the Hegelian term dialectic. On the one hand, you want stability. You want stasis. Think about a good friendship. You want to always know that pal's going to be there. Friendship, stability, harmony, all those kinds of Platonist language words. But on the other hand, you don't want boring. You don't want repetitive. You don't want so predictable that it kind of becomes mindless and it no longer has any real energy to it. You need tension. You need energy. You need something other than stasis. You need friction. How do you balance the two? How can the two coexist? Now, the great romantic writer Blake, who we'll meet in a couple of weeks, writes two sets of poems. Songs of Innocence, he calls them, and Songs of Experience. In the Songs of Innocence passages, he writes about naivete, innocence, beauty that has not been tainted. In the Songs of Experience, he writes about the exact opposite. Those experiences in life which are, how can we say it, pain-filled. Sources of suffering. It is a really interesting question in Milton's Theodicy, and it's one you'll probably want to address in your paper as well. Which is the better state? Is it better to be completely stupid, ignorant, naive, innocent? Is that better? Or is it better to have knowledge, experiences, even though those experiences will cause us pain and suffering? Is it better? Of course, this becomes a really intriguing point in the Genesis 3 story. At the very end of that passage I copied for you, God will say, "Now man has become as us, knowing good and evil," which seems to suggest that snake wasn't completely lying when the snake said, "If you eat from this fruit, you'll become as God, knowing good and evil." The question has always been, how does God speak those lines, "Now man has become as us"? Does he say it like this, "Now man's become sad"? Or, "Yay, now man's become like us, knowing good"? Of course, even though the word fall or sin doesn't appear in that passage, the other question is a simple one. If you want to call what happens for Adam and Eve sin, certainly many theologians later will. Milton will see it that way. Fall, sin. The question is an intriguing one. Were Adam and Eve more like God than before they sinned or after they sinned? Well, I mean, we're inclined to think they're like God more before, right? Because that made them perfect. Or were they somehow strangely more perfect after the fall? Is it better to know, or is it better to not know? Of course, note the observation. There's no going back, is there? You can't undo it and pretend like you're not a senior and you're back at your freshman year all young and stupid. Can't go back, can you? You can't forget now the question I just asked and pretend like you haven't engaged in it. That's the thing about knowledge. You go forward, but you lose something in the process, correct? Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? Finally, one other Theodicy answer. Often when bad things happen, people will ask, why does this happen to me? Milton wants to make the argument that that's the wrong question. The real question is, why did this happen for me? All pain is propedeutic. It is instructional in some way. It teaches us something about who we are and what we are, not only as individuals, but as groups, beginning, of course, with the pair, Adam and Eve, and then moving forward to the tribe, the village, the tribe, and of course, ultimately, the nation and the world. So, spend a little time sitting down and writing about what you think about Milton's Theodicy. Does it work? Do his answers work for you? Do you find any comfort in his theodicyc project? Or does it just confuse you even more? You can obviously take kind of into consideration what you already thought on this subject, and now what you're kind of thinking on this subject again. And of course, in the process, coming to terms as all of us who have to read Milton's Paradise Lost have to come to, the realization is you never quite get there with Milton. There's always more. There's always more. And someday later in your life, you'll probably pick up Paradise Lost again and read it again, and you'll realize, oh, there's a lot I missed. Just like now, if you were to pick up Romeo and Juliet and read it, you would see there's so much that I missed because I was a stupid freshman. And I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. The same will be the case with all of these texts we study, not least of which, of course, the great Paradise Lost. Thank you.